All right, guys, welcome back to the Liz Wheeler Show. I'm Liz Wheeler. If you haven't already subscribed to the show, please do that before we get started. Just grab your smartphone, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. On YouTube, hit subscribe and hit that bell so I can notify you every time we drop a new episode, which is Monday through Friday, or an interview or a video. We have tons of new content for you. On rumble.com/Liz Wheeler, you can not only subscribe, which I appreciate, there's a little red button next to the subscribe button that allows you to join the Liz Wheeler Show community on Locals, a VIP community. We have lots going on there, extended segments, VIP content, lots of good stuff. Welcome to everybody who has been joining, by the way. We have a lot of new faces over there. Okay, for today's show, have I got a conspiracy theory about Ukraine for you? Before we even get into that, the funny thing is the words themselves, that phrase, conspiracy theory, have kind of lost their sting. If you had told me 10 years ago that people would be slinging this word, conspiracy theory, at me for everything that I said, I would have probably been like mortally wounded. I would have been like, what have I done with my reputation? Why is it in tatters? Now, are those words even an insult? Are they a compliment? I mean, if you look at the track record over the past 5-6 years, all the conspiracy theories that we were told were conspiracy theories, or the things we were told were conspiracy theories, have come true. They maybe were conspiracies, but they weren't conspiracy theories, like the Hunter Biden laptop story. What were we told about that? We were told it was a conspiracy theory. What were we told about the fact that COVID-19 came from a lab in Wuhan, China, the Wuhan Institute of Virology? We were told it was a conspiracy theory. What were we told when we said, well, Fauci's NIH gave a grant to EcoHealth Alliance, which subcontracted that grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for essentially gain-of-function research on bat-derived coronaviruses? We were told that was a conspiracy theory, but it's true. When we said the FBI tried to entrap Trump, they spied on Trump during 2015, and then after he was inaugurated in 2016, we were told that was a conspiracy theory. But it wasn't. It was true. When we talked about electioneering in the 2020 election, specifically in Wisconsin, we were told, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court found that it was, in fact, true. All of these different things. I mean, I could go on and on. We could probably do a whole show just about this. We're not going to right now. But we could go on and on about this entire list. So the question, I guess, is should we even be insulted by the term conspiracy theory? Is that something that should cause us to rethink what we're talking about? I don't know. When it comes to these past stories, when I was called a conspiracy theorist and then it turned out to be true, the phrase conspiracy theorist just made me feel like I had tremendous insight and sharp, accurate analysis in the face of really harsh political pushback. So in other words, the phrase conspiracy theory to me has been neutralized. In fact, I'm pretty proud of myself, and you should be too, for having called those political stories. The Hunter Biden laptop story, the Fauci-funded, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the FBI targeting Trump, electioneering in Wisconsin. Having a history and a track record of analyzing things correctly, especially in the midst of an environment of propaganda, that's a good thing. You should be very proud of it. I know I'm proud of it too. So what we're going to do today, though, today we're going to analyze a conspiracy theory, explore a conspiracy theory that went absolutely viral on Twitter. I'm talking like in the first 24 hours that this tweet thread was published, it reached over 7 million people. That's just in the first 24 hours. Like I'm not even tracking it at this point. Now, the author of this Twitter thread contends that there's a conspiracy behind the war in Ukraine. His contention is that the real reason that the U.S. federal government is giving away all of our money to Ukraine, sending tanks now to fight Russia, even though the whole war itself is asinine and none of us want to die in a nuclear fireball over a border dispute in Ukraine. He's contending that the real reason behind this is because the U.S. has biolabs in Ukraine, sort of a partnership with Ukraine, in which they create pathogens, at least U.S. actors, maybe not the government itself, creates pathogens to release on the world. And the author of this thread contends that Big Pharma is not only complicit in this, they know about it in advance so they can preconceive cures in order to profit off it. Now listen, there's a lot here. But when nearly 10 million people around Twitter alone are reading this, we're going to break this down fully. We are going to analyze what's true, what's questionable. We're going to separate fact from inference, and then we're going to give a rating, an overall rating on whether or not this is true. We're going to talk about a humongous legal victory for conservatives against Joe Biden's weaponized Department of Justice. In fact, that's the best news that I've heard all week. So let's get to it. Okay, guys, I use ExpressVPN to keep my family and our information safe on the internet. But did you know that ExpressVPN also allows you to access more content on Netflix? I'm serious. Here's what I mean. Watching Netflix without using ExpressVPN is like paying for a gym membership, but only being able to use the treadmill. Seems unfair. You want to access everything, right? Well, ExpressVPN lets you change your online location so that you can control where you want Netflix to think you're located, and therefore you will be able to get access to content libraries anywhere. Netflix has almost 100 different server locations, so you will be able to get access to thousands of new shows. And this doesn't just work on Netflix. It works with other streaming services too, like BBC iPlayer, YouTube, and more. It's super easy to do. Life hack here. Just open the app, select a location, tap one button to connect, and refresh the page to access the geo-restricted show that you want to watch. Be smart. Stop paying full price for streaming services and only getting access to a fraction of their content. Get your money's worth at expressvpn.com/Liz. Don't forget to use my link at expressvpn.com/Liz to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. expressvpn.com/Liz. Okay, before we get to any of that, I don't know if you guys saw this video. This is one of the funniest things that I've seen. This is a 59-year-old man out of Finland who identifies as a woman, who goes by the name Minna Maria. And this 59-year-old man is fulfilling a childhood dream that he had of being an ice princess. This is a real story. This is absolutely factual. This is happening before our very eyes. And this 59-year-old transgender ice skater, ice princess, is performing in front of audiences at some of the most prominent ice skating events around the world. Take a look.
Naismoodissa, vaikka syntyperäisin olenkin mies. Ja sieltä on niin kuin 9 vuotta aikaa, eli siihen 9 vuoteen sisältyy aika paljon. Eli kun lähdetään ihan nollasta, niin ihan jo sitä, että pysyy pystyssä 2 jalalla, pysyy pystyssä 1 jalalla ja sen jälkeen rupeaa niin kuin uskaltamaan tehdä jotakin siellä jäällä. Ja sitten alkaa pikkuhiljaa kisaamaan ja esiintymään näytöksissä ja niin edelleen. Että sanotaan, että aika kivaa.
I actually feel a little bit bad for him here. I'm laughing, but I also feel bad. He's falling and he can't get up on the ice.
Mutta eteenpäin mennään ja homma jatkuu.
Mahtavaa. Näiden EM-kisojen slogan on tule sellaisena kuin olet.
Okay, I do feel the tiniest bit of sympathy for him when he falls. I have to admit, I'm a compassionate person, and he couldn't get up on the ice. It's sad. But a couple of things. First of all, that's a man. That's a man right there. But the craziest part of that video is not the nutty man, the nutty old man, actually, who thinks that he's an ice princess. It is all the people in this arena pretending that he is a woman when he doesn't. He's not. He's not. It's absolutely bonkers for people to pretend that. Like, is this the condition that the human race is in, that we have just decided to allow an old man to pretend to be an ice princess? And we're just gonna say, okay, you are what you are. For your enjoyment, here's an extra picture of Minna Maria performing at a different time. In fact, performing in Japanese whiteface. Now, this is gonna just blow the woke mind here, because do you support this man because his identity is transgender, or do you cancel this man because for cultural appropriation? I would love to hear the woke debate on this, but take a look at this. So which do you think wins? Do you think in the game of intersectionality, which is a higher priority? transgender, or cultural appropriation? I don't know. Apparently the question has already been answered. I mean, I'm asking it, but they're letting this old man pretend to be an ice princess. So I guess we have our answer. Okay. Let's talk about this good news. So a lot of the time, or often I should say, I get people asking, like, can we talk about the good news? Can we talk about the victories that we win? We talk about corruption all the time. We talk about bad things. We expose people for doing dangerous things. We oppose legislation that would be dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. What about the good things? What about our victories? Well, they don't need to be talked about as much because they don't require our attention. Victories don't require our attention, but I totally hear you. And this is the best news that I've heard all week. Mark Houck, who is the pro-life man who was targeted by Biden's Department of Justice, has been acquitted on both charges. Now, we talked about this case several months ago right before it was about to go to court. It's a simply horrendous case. This guy, Mark Houck, is a Catholic man. He's married. He's the father of 7. They're a homeschooling family, and he's the founder of a group called the King's Men, which is healing. It's a group that helps young men with healing from porn addiction and promotes Christian virtues among men. So, in other words, this guy's a good dude. He's doing good things, and he's trying to share his bountiful blessings with other people. So every Wednesday, he drives 2 hours to the city of Philadelphia in order to sidewalk counsel the entire day, 6 to 8 hours outside of abortion clinics. Yes, so now you can see why he's the target of the Department of Justice. So what happened to beget this whole kerfuffle is he had a little bit of an altercation with an activist, an abortion activist who was outside of the clinic, who was going to accompany women who were seeking abortions into the clinic. But this person, who was not a clinic employee, he was a volunteer, instead started harassing Mark Houck and his son, his young son who was there. This abortion activist came up to Mark Houck and was shouting profanities in his face, and he was saying horrendous things to Mark Houck's son. I think I have some of the quotes here of what he said. He said, "Your dad is a gay slur that starts with an F." And Mark Houck said, "Listen, sir, you don't have permission to speak to my child. You need to move away from my child." And what happened is the pro-abortion activist got in the 12-year-old son, Mark Houck's son's face, and was just screaming these obscenities. So Mark defended his child. Of course, he protected his child against this rabid adult. And he shoved the guy away from the child, and the guy fell backwards. He was not hurt, but he tried to sue Mark. And the case was thrown out, actually. This was last year. The case was thrown out by a district court in Philadelphia. But then Joe Biden's Department of Justice, run by one of the most corrupt men in the country, Merrick Garland, picked this up and charged Mark with violations of the FACE Act. Now, the FACE Act, that's an acronym for the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which makes it a federal crime, and I'm going to quote from the statute here, to injure, intimidate, and interfere with anyone because that person is a provider of reproductive health care. Now, this law, the intention of this law was to protect abortion clinic workers and women who were seeking abortion from physical harassment. There are already laws against that, so it's mostly a law that was intended as virtue signaling and intended to target pro-lifers, because it's obviously already against the law to physically hold someone back or to touch them without their permission. So I'm not sure why this law was necessary. I think it was not necessary, but if you're convicted of this, then you can serve. Mark Houck faced a maximum sentence of 11 years in prison, fines up more than $250,000 if he was convicted. He, of course, contended that he was not guilty of this, that he was just defending his child, but Merrick Garland was not interested in the truth here. So fast forward, Merrick Garland doesn't just charge him, he sends FBI agents, like 20, 30 FBI agents, to Mark Houck's house at the break of dawn with rifles out. They grab Mark Houck in front of his children, pull him out of his house as his wife and children are looking on. His children are freaked out. This is so traumatic for them. His wife asked for the warrant. The FBI agents at first refused to even give her a warrant. Then when they did, they showed her briefly just the first page and said they were going to take him to the FBI headquarters in Philadelphia anyway. It was horrendous and traumatic and a clear obvious example of the Biden Department of Justice being weaponized against conservatives and Christians and pro-lifers. Anybody who opposes Biden's radical leftist agenda, which includes abortion up to the moment of birth for any reason. Mark Houck went to court. This was brought to court. After a week-long trial, he was acquitted on both charges. This is great news. It's a horrendous story that ended well, that ended with justice being served, that ended with Merrick Garland having egg on his face, an embarrassment. The Biden administration is humiliated, has been humiliated with this verdict, and this verdict is just. The Biden administration was trying to criminally punish someone just because they don't like his politics and his religion, and they lost. And that, my friends, is reason to celebrate. We don't often get this kind of celebration. But the moral of the story here is, remember, the Biden administration is weaponizing the Department of Justice and the federal government against us. But moreover, they're targeting people like Mark Houck to frighten the rest of us. They're trying to use someone in the pro-life movement as an example so that everyone else is too afraid to take part in the pro-life movement. They're trying to bully us and coerce us into abandoning our beliefs because we're fearful about the repercussions. So the moral of the story is, do not back down. Our system of justice does still work, even though there are corrupt bureaucrats that sometimes are in charge of it and certainly embedded into it. It doesn't mean that the system itself is wrong. The system itself sometimes comes through. Also, I don't know if you guys saw this. This was really funny. Harmeet Dillon, who unfortunately just lost the race to be RNC chair, Ronna Romney McDaniel, defeated her. But after her loss, her Twitter account, she's so authentic and so funny on her Twitter account, but she tweeted earlier today that her billable hours, meaning the time that she spends being an attorney for other people, not just being in politics, her billable hours were essentially non-existent last month, thanks to the fact that she was so dedicated to running this challenge to McDaniel at the RNC. And she's like, so my billable hours were about nothing. So if you need an attorney who's willing to fight, give me a call, which I found to be the most hilarious tweet, because Harmeet Dillon is probably the busiest woman in the nation. She does more for more conservative causes than almost anybody that I know. But the moral of that story is there are people willing to fight for you if you are willing to stand up for your values, even in the face of bullying from the Biden administration. Okay, so let's talk about this conspiracy theory. This very, very viral conspiracy theory about the war in Ukraine. Is it a conspiracy theory, or is it a theory about a conspiracy? We're going to break it down. But first, I want to talk to you about Upside. You may not know this about me, but I love doing photography. I love taking pictures. It can get expensive, though, this hobby of mine, especially with the price hikes lately. That's why I have to tell you about my favorite new way to save money. It's an app called Upside. It's really an incredible app for anyone who is feeling inflation when, you fill up your tank of gas or you buy groceries. With Upside, I get cash back on every purchase that I can then use to fund all of the pictures that I print to put in all of my photo albums. Upside is basically cash back for just doing what you were going to do anyway. It helps you offset inflated prices. And the app's super easy to use. To get started, you just download the free Upside app, you use my promo code Liz5, and you can get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. Next, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside, then pay as usual with a credit or debit card, follow the steps in the app, and voila, you get paid. In comparison to credit card rewards or loyalty programs, you can earn 3 times more cash back with Upside. Upside users are earning hundreds of dollars a year. So download the free Upside app and use promo code Liz5 to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas using promo code Liz. But first, download the free Upside app. Okay. So I've been waiting to talk to you guys about this since I first saw this viral thread on Twitter, and it was published by an account. The account username is War Clandestine. So you can go to twitter.com/War Clandestine. You can read along if you want with this thread. I believe the last time I checked, it was his pinned thread, but you'll know which one it is when I start reading. This thread has gone viral. It's been viewed by nearly 10 million people just in the first 24 hours that it was posted. So I've gotten a lot of questions from you guys about what I think about this. Is this true? Is it a conspiracy theory? What do we make of this? And so I thought, okay, well, let's sit down together and actually do together what I do to analyze these things. Let's sort through what's fact, what's verified, what's unverified, what's unverifiable, and I'll give you my take. I'll give you my analysis. I'll share my thought process with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through the tweets that he tweeted in this tweet thread, and we'll analyze it as we go. At the end, I'll tell you what my full take on the thread is. Okay, so he starts out by saying, allow me to address why U.S. establishment politicians are sending tanks, jets, weapons, equipment, and $100+ billion to Ukraine. It has nothing to do with Ukrainian citizens and everything to do with deep state assets and secrets in Ukraine. He says, let's go back to when and where it all began. Flashback to 2005. Then Senator Obama and Senator Lugar visited former Soviet biological and chemical facilities in Ukraine and established the U.S. deep state roots in Ukraine to quote-unquote counter bioweapons. Okay, so let's pause there for 1 second. In this second tweet, there are three claims made. The first claim is that Senator Obama and Senator Lugar visited Russia. That's true. That's verifiably true. That's a fact. That while they were in Ukraine, or I should say they visited Ukraine, and they visited these chemical facilities, these former bioweapons labs. That is also true. Okay, verifiable, true. And then he says, and while they were there, they established U.S. deep state roots in Ukraine. That is an inference. That is not a verifiable fact. We'll get to which are important and which are not, but I want to establish what is fact and what is inference. There's no evidence provided in this tweet thread that they established U.S. deep state roots in Ukraine. Doesn't mean it's not true, but no evidence in this particular thread. Okay, moving on. When speaking of the labs in 2005, here's how they were described by the Washington Post. The labs were, quote, part of a Cold War network of anti-plague stations that supplied highly lethal pathogens to Soviet bioweapons factories. So when Russia does anti-plague research, it's bioweapons. That's all true. All of these bioweapons labs in Ukraine, and perhaps we should actually step out of this thread for a second and say about a year ago, this same Twitter account published a similarly viral thread talking about the U.S. bioweapons labs in Ukraine, or the U.S. affiliated bioweapons labs in Ukraine. And at the time, all these fact checkers from all these mainstream media outlets said that's not true, that's false, there are no U.S. bioweapons labs in Ukraine. And it turns out there are. It turns out that the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine actually had on their website confirmation that there are U.S. bioweapons labs in Ukraine, that the U.S. took control of former Soviet bioweapons labs. So that's sort of the background of this secondary thread. After that first thread went viral, that in the pre-Elon Twitter days, Twitter kicked War Clandestine off Twitter. Just 3 days ago, he was restored. He was finally brought back in the, obviously, Elon Musk Twitter era, or Elon era of Twitter. And he publishes this second thread. So it is true that there are bioweapons labs in Ukraine and that they were part of a Cold War network of anti-plague stations, which was just a front for bioweapons research. Okay, let's jump back into the thread. But when the U.S. does, quote unquote, defensive gain-of-function directed evolution research, it's not bioweapons. This was the narrative from the mainstream media. In 2005, the Washington Post admits that anti-plague research results in the production of highly lethal pathogens, aka bioweapons. Well, it seems they changed their tune in 2022. So that part's true as well. This is just objective analysis or empirical observation of a narrative from the left that has changed. And it's also true to identify that the narrative from the left, when they engage in any kind of gain-of-function research or directed evolution, this is what we heard from them after the Project Veritas video dropped, where that guy from Pfizer said that Pfizer was exploring doing directed evolution with monkeys in COVID-19. The defense the left gives is that, oh, we do this to keep people safe. We do this not because we're developing something to be levied as a bioweapon against people, but because we're doing this in case our enemies develop this so that we can more quickly protect people with either a drug, some kind of therapeutic, or a vaccine. So he's identifying properly that this is the evolution of the narrative. That's true. Back to the thread. The U.S., he says, led by Obama, passed the Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Act of 2005. the U.S. took over former Soviet labs and facilities, supposedly to destroy stockpiles of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons in Ukraine. That is all true. That is fact. He goes on to say, Obama opened the floodgates for the deep state, created biological weapons programs with the Ukrainian government, and established connections for U.S. oligarchs to build biolab companies in the lawless land of Ukraine. Companies like Biden's Metabiota. Okay, whoa. Put a pin on this one for a second. So let's take this one line by line. Obama opened the floodgates for the deep state. Well, you could argue that that's true. That's certainly true. I mean, he did that by expanding the administrative state in the United States. He did that by appointing in existing administrative state agencies really political actors who took advantage of the rulemaking process and used that basically to control our lives. Certainly, Obama opened the floodgates for the deep state. That I would rate that as true. Created biological weapons programs with the Ukrainian government and established connections for U.S. oligarchs to build biolab companies in the lawless land of Ukraine. That's inference. That's inference right there. Now, when I say something's inference, I'm using that word. I'm using that word more like I would use speculation, because it's simply not verified. There's simply not, or in this tweet thread, there's not verified evidence. So when I say inference, I mean, yes, there's many facts that might point in that direction, but it is not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 plus something else equals what? And he's filling in just one too many variables without providing the evidence. Again, doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that it's very important to identify which things are fact and verifiable and which things are inference when you're building an overall argument for something. So then he says, then the situation turned sour. Under U.S. supervision, Ukraine fell into civil war in February of 2014. In the disarray of war, State Department, Clinton, and the CIA took full control of Ukraine's government. Nuland, that's Victoria Nuland, facilitated a regime change. All of that is true. That is accurate. He says Victoria Nuland, who spilled the beans on the fear of Russian forces getting their hands on the biological research in Ukraine, engineered the color revolution in Ukraine. They started a civil war, then picked their puppet to run the government, creating a deep state proxy. So part of this is factual. When he said Nuland spilled the beans on the fear of Russian forces getting their hands on biological research, that's true. She testified, in fact, in the Senate, I believe, questioned by Marco Rubio. And she admitted that, yes, the U.S. fears the Russian forces getting their hands on this bioweapons research, biological research, which we know means bioweapons. Then she says, War Clandestine, not she, he says, now, with complete control of the Ukrainian government, then the Bidens began their dirty work. Biden visited Ukraine 13 plus times, securing U.S. funding for Ukrainian oligarchs. Then used his power to fire a state prosecutor who figured out Biden's kickback laundering scheme. All of that is true. We've played that video right there a million times on the show, showing Biden threatening the prosecutor in Ukraine who was going to investigate Hunter Biden. We know Hunter Biden has zero experience in the energy industry, and yet he was paid a ton of money to sit on the board of Burisma, and that's not the only one. Of course, the Bidens were corruptly profiting from Ukraine. That's true. Then this thread says, so the reason why all of our tax dollars are in Ukraine is because Ukraine is a deep state proxy controlled by the ruling families of the DNC and Soros. They are trying to protect their assets, secrets in Ukraine, most consequential of which is their biological activity. This particular tweet in its entirety is speculation. This tweet is it's not even inference, it's just speculation. This is a pretty big jump. And listen, when I'm analyzing this, I'm being extremely clinical. You know me, you know my analysis, you know that I'm a natural-born skeptic. And then on top of it being a natural skeptic, I have seen the abuse of government that has been levied against me and my family and you and your families and our communities and our children, how government has been harnessed to abuse us based on our political and religious views. I believe that most of the institutions in our nation have been captured by Marxist ideology. So far be it from me to be a skeptic when someone suggests that there is corruption begot of government bureaucrats. At the same time, it's necessary and prudent and honest to analyze what is fact and what is inference in a thread like this, especially because when there is speculation, it needs to be verified. Otherwise, the claim is not a report. The claim is an opinion, or the claim is, well, a theory. It's not actually fact. It's not actually, this is what's happening. It's, is this what's happening? And how do we figure out if that is the case? So this particular tweet is speculation. He then goes on to say, actually, before we get to that, I want to talk to you about 4 Patriots. I like 4 Patriots, and I think you will too, because a food shortage could be coming even in the US. This is what experts were writing as recently as July. Drought, inflation, and new political policies are pushing America's food supply near its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important than ever. I encourage you to create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriots survival food kits. It's not ordinary food. We're talking good for 25 years, super survival food. Handpicked right in a family-owned facility in the US and giving jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are great. They're compact, sturdy, water-resistant. They stack easily. They have different breakfasts, lunches, dinners, and it's super easy to make. You can make these in less than 20 minutes. You just add boiling water, simmer, and then serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use code Liz to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store. Just go to 4patriots.com and use code Liz to get 10% off. That's 4Patriots, code Liz, to start building your own stockpile today. 4patriots.com, code Liz. Okay, so this war clandestine thread goes on to say, the reason the US mainstream media went all out pro-Ukraine is because the media is owned by the pharma companies via advertisement money. The pharma companies who rely on the biolabs in Ukraine to create pathogens so their vaccine scheme can profit. The only part of that particular tweet that's verifiably true is that the media is owned by pharma companies via advertisement money. That is simply a fact. That is true. Almost any media that you can think of. But the rest is speculation. The pharma companies rely on biolabs in Ukraine to create pathogens so their vaccine scheme can profit. That is pure speculation. That's inference. He goes on to say the reason the FBI and the DHS went full Orwell and weaponized big tech to censor all reporting on the biolabs in Ukraine is because the intel community is compromised by the deep state. The deep state who can't let people find out about their pathogen production scheme. Again, the beginning of that tweet, 100% accurate. Intel community is in fact compromised by the deep state, but is the deep state an active participant in producing pathogens? Show me the proof. If you show me the proof, I'm happy to buy into this. And I find this thread to be very interesting, but there are some things that are speculation and that have not been confirmed. And we're going to talk about where those speculations, that inference, the allegations come from in just a second. Let me just finish these last couple tweets. He says the reason the House Democrats and the DNC went insane and impeached Trump over making a single phone call to Zelensky in Ukraine is because they couldn't allow Trump to snoop around and investigate their deep state proxy. Trump was on to whatever they were hiding, aka bioweapons. So again, all of that tweet is true until the last little bit. Not that it's not true, but it's speculation. It's not verifiable fact. The rest of it's true. Then he says the reason Zelensky ordered the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense to destroy all state documents affiliated with U.S. biolab companies Metabiota and Battelle the day the missiles started flying is because he knew Putin was looking for the bioweapons. Yeah, that's probably true. He said the reason the WHO advised Ukraine to destroy all their pathogens at the labs that the mainstream media said didn't exist is because the WHO knew Putin was looking for the bioweapons. The same WHO that created a global medical police state due to COVID-19. All that's true. As you can see, there's a lot of good stuff in this thread. He then goes on to say, Big Pharma, the mainstream media, big tech, the intelligence community, Zelensky, the World Health Organization, the NIH, and deep state politicians are all working together to accomplish the same goal, to cover up the criminal biological weapons production in Ukraine, all the entities who happened to benefit from COVID-19. Now, that's the culmination of his speculation. It's true that many of these entities profited or benefited, at least ideologically, maybe with power, from COVID-19 and how governments handled COVID-19. But his full allegation is that Ukraine is actually producing pathogens that they intentionally release around the world and pharma's in full knowledge of this so that they can preemptively create therapeutics or vaccines to profit off of this. He concludes by saying, this is why these entities are hyper defensive about all things related to COVID-19, biological research and Ukraine. It's because he says we are close to the proof of their crimes against humanity for which the punishment is harsh. So his conclusion is opinion. Now, if this is an editorial, if this is an op-ed, that's fine. This is a theory that he's proposing. If he's proposing this as fact, then my analysis of this is very interesting. I retweeted this on Twitter because I thought people would be interested in it. It's plausible. It's not implausible, but it leaves many questions that need to be answered. Here are a couple of the questions that I have. What's the point of a U.S. bioweapons program? Why partner with Ukraine? What's in it for Ukraine and what's in it for us? Of all the places to partner with, why Ukraine? Does the deep state that he mentions profit from this? And if so, how? Is it financially? Is it power? Is it ideologically? And then this is a pretty big allegation to make the allegation that pharma is in the know in creating pathogens. Now, the Project Veritas tapes make that a little more believable because we hear a Pfizer employee talking about trying this directed evolution, this creation of a different strain of COVID-19 so that they can create a vaccine to respond to that. So it makes it a little more believable, but it's believable because there's video proof of it. And I don't think it would be as accepted, and maybe it shouldn't be, if it was an allegation and there wasn't the video proof. And finally, who's behind this? So this kind of conspiracy that he's talking about would have to be coordinated by someone. So who is that? So my final analysis is this. This is a theory. This is a theory. It is built on some fact, the facts that we identified, but it hinges on some serious inferences. And here's where the real problem arises. The speculation or the inferences on which this thread hinges are actually allegations from the Russian government. The Russian government is the one that first proposed the idea that the bioweapons labs in Ukraine were a front for the U.S. creating not just bioweapons, I think that part's probably true, but that they were actively disseminating these pathogens, these created pathogens, in order to profit what they termed to be U.S. oligarchs, like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and George Soros, I believe is who the Russian government named in this. Now, just because the Russian government made the original allegation, does that automatically mean that the allegation is untrue? No, not necessarily. I mean, the Russian government is controlled by Putin. Putin is a master of propaganda, but part of propaganda is liberally using truth to build your propaganda. It's only at the very end of using the truth that you twist it into something that's not true in order to make it palatable or believable to people, because most of what you're telling them is true in propaganda. So does that mean that the allegations from Russia are automatically untrue because they're from Russia? No, not necessarily. But does it mean that we, as American citizens, should believe what Russia is saying without verification? No. The answer to that is no. So are those inferences on which the war clandestine thread hinged, are these allegations from the Russian government verified in the thread? And the answer to that is no. The allegations that the Russian government originally presented, which serve as the foundation of this thread, are simply accepted because the Russian government said them, or simply accepted because of this fundamental skepticism of how the mainstream media and the Democratic left have behaved, not just around COVID, but by weaponizing the power of the federal government against the American citizen. So overall, how would I rate this thread? I would rate this thread a 6 out of 10. There's a lot of truth and a lot of fact in it, but there are a lot of inferences that have not been verified, and the origin of the allegations is the Russian government, and there's no verification. And there's no benefit of the doubt that I would give the Russian government without verification. Now, zooming out on this whole conversation, the reason that we're sitting here and talking about this is because so many people read this thread, including me. I found this thread to be very interesting. I actually sent it to a couple of friends when I first read it. The reason so many people read it is because our government, our federal government, has betrayed our trust. Because there is a deep state. There is a swamp. That's the other name for the administrative state, where these bureaucrats, these unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats that are essentially unfireable, do things. They either create rules and regulations or they abuse their positions of power and use our money to do things that harm us. Things that they have no authority to do. Whether this is on Ukraine, whether this is on COVID, whether this is the forever wars that they're constantly fighting, whether it's financial, whether it's moral, our government has betrayed our trust. And so when people read something like this, they're more likely to believe it. And there's many things that are verifiably true in this thread. There's many things that you should believe in this. Now, here's the thing. I reached out to this Twitter account, War Clandestine, to ask some questions, to ask for verification, and trying to stay ahead of this story as I saw how viral this was going on Twitter. Now, the Twitter account itself is a pseudonym, War Clandestine, but the author of this thread, the guy behind this account, is not anonymous. It's a guy by the name of Jacob Creech, who is the author, and he agreed to come on the show. He agreed to sit down to an interview so that we could chew on this, so that we could push and pull this, talk about this. And this is partly how I conduct my research, how I stay ahead of this stuff, is taking risks on doing interviews like this, talking to people who don't necessarily have not the resume, because not the resume to present themselves, but who don't have a reputation build up that precedes them. And so I thought to myself, who is this guy? Is this guy a nut? Is this guy, totally legit? Is this thread totally legit? Let's talk about some of the questions here. Made me think, made 7 million, almost 10 million other people think. It's worth a conversation. So I sat down with him, talked to him for a while about this thread. You can find that full interview on Locals. It's available at lizwheelershow.com/locals if you want to hear that. It was an interesting conversation. I think you'll probably enjoy it. And one thing is for sure. One thing is certain. The war in Ukraine is corrupt. The war in Ukraine is an atrocity. The war in Ukraine shouldn't be what it is. And it is what it is thanks to corrupt US politicians. Yes, Putin was wrong to invade, but Zelensky is a hoax. The Ukrainian people might be incredibly brave, incredibly courageous, incredibly dedicated to fighting for their own sovereignty. That's fine. That's admirable. But Zelensky is a hoax. Zelensky is actively endangering the Ukrainian people by what he's doing. Zelensky, if he gets his way, will escalate this war. The United States, you and I, potentially will be pulled into a war with Russia, potentially a nuclear war if Zelensky gets his way. And Zelensky is getting his way with US politicians. He is getting everything that he's asking for and more. US politicians aren't attaching any strings to what they're giving him, any strings to the money, any strings to the tanks that they're sending him. Why shouldn't Vladimir Putin look at what US politicians are doing, giving Ukraine the arms to kill Russian soldiers? Why shouldn't Putin sit there and say, well, that's the US killing my soldiers? Because they're giving the weapons and the funding so that Zelensky can simply pull the trigger. Ukraine will never win this war, and the US will be bankrupt in the process. That is what we know for sure. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.